So with Season 7 rolling out, I'm sure there's a lot of new players coming into the game or trying out Conquest for the first time, or maybe you're just watching this video to get some info on other roles besides your main one. Either way, this video should be useful for you as I'm going to talk about what each role does and why you would want to main them in Conquest. So let's dive right in with my personal favourite role, that being Solo Lane. So Solo Lane in Conquest is the premier frontline tank role. It's very focused on the laning phase, in which you'll be 1v1ing the enemy solo laner in an attempt to gain a lead, with which you can rotate later on in the game and make a huge impact on teamfights. Solo is a very sustain focused role that plays for the long game. If you're looking to burst people down from 100% HP in 3 seconds, this might not be your role. But if you enjoy min-maxing, getting the absolute most out of your character and playing the long fight, Solo might just be the role you've been looking for. Of course, most roles have a fairly limited god pool that will do well within that specific role. Solo Lane is actually one of the more forgiving roles in terms of what you can actually make work there, but there are still limits. If you want to be a successful solo laner, your main focus will be on tanks. Warriors are the premier class that you'll see in solo, along with some guardians, so if those are the types of gods and playstyles you enjoy, then this might be the role for you. As I said, solo is a very diverse role, and so other classes can work as well, such as some mages or assassins, especially when built tanky, but for the most part you'll be playing warriors and a few guardians if you want to be a successful solo laner. If you want more information and guides about Solo Lane or any of the other roles, then be sure to subscribe to the channel as my Season 7 in-depth Conquest role guides are coming out soon. If you like being tanky and enjoy the 1v1 aspect of laning, you'll probably enjoy Solo Lane. In terms of difficulty, I would say Solo is a 5 out of 10. It's not too hard or too easy, it just requires some raw skill on your god and a lot of matchup knowledge. Okay, so moving on, let's cover mid laners and what they're all about. So the mid laner in Smite usually fills a high burst damage and AoE role for the team. As with most roles, this isn't strictly always true, other things can work, such as single target damage ability based hunters and the like, but for the most part it's big AoE burst damage gods, typically mages, that see play in the mid lane. Due to its central location on the map, mid lane is often a hub for allies and enemies alike to congregate and fight around. So be ready for some early game skirmish fights and to make some early rotations in the game, compared to side lane roles like solo or ADC that rarely leave their lane in the early game. Mid laners are typically looking to get pressure around the middle of the map and secure jungle camps, as well as their minion wave to get XP and gold to gain a lead, then look to translate that lead into late game teamfights where most mages can be devastating with their high AoE burst. Mages, and thus by proxy mid laners, are also the premier objective securers for their team and will often be needed if objective calls are made. Be prepared to work with your jungler and support early on to roam and score early wins while maintaining your own farm to stay relevant late in the game. If you enjoy burst damage, mages, and fighting as a team, then mid lane might just be for you. In terms of difficulty, I would give mid lane a 7 out of 10. It's more difficult than side lane roles like ADC and solo because there's more to manage and more people to deal with in the early game, but it's not as hard as the two roaming roles in support and jungle. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the ADC before we cover the two more complex roles, those being of course support and jungle. So the ADC in Smite is sort of the counterparts in the mid laner. Where mid is usually focused on big AoE burst damage and space control, ADC is focused on very high sustained single target damage but lack AoE and burst potential. The typical gods for this role are hunters and AA mages, aka ones that are focused on strong basic attacks and single target damage like Freya, Kronos, Sol, Olorun, etc. ADC is a very farm focused role. Most carry gods are weaker early on but monstrous later in the game, so they look to play fairly safe early on and get a lead in the laning phase so they can destroy in teamfights later on. That doesn't mean you can't get aggressive and look to pick fights in duo lane though, often being aggressive is a key way to get a lead on the enemy. You'll get a good balance of laning with your support in the 2v2 and also laning by yourself in the 1v1, as often the support will start in duo lane with you but will leave at some point to begin roaming around the mid lane, which leaves you time to 1v1 the enemy ADC and really get a lead going. If you enjoy the true carry playstyle, the 1v1 fight, and are good at hitting auto attacks, then ADC might just be for you. In terms of difficulty, I would say ADC is a 4.5 out of 10. It's very similar to solo, but requires a little bit less matchup knowledge and mechanical skill. Sticking with the duo lane for now, let's cover support next. I'm sure most of you can probably get a picture in your mind of what the support is in a game like Smite. Yeah, they're there to support the team. They're not going to be dealing tons of damage or hard carrying the game, but they're essential to the team comp nonetheless. Supports are typically very tanky and often come with abilities to help out teammates such as shields, healing, or CC to stop enemies killing your teammates. Support is one of the two what I like to call roaming roles in Smite, in that they will spend a good portion of the early to mid game roaming around the map where they're needed instead of covering a specific lane. Thus, by nature, the role is more complex and harder to master than the 3 laning roles that I've mentioned earlier. If you enjoy a more laid-back playstyle where the weight of carrying the game isn't on your shoulders, and or being the unsung hero of matches that gets no praise but silently carries their team, then the support role might be for you. In terms of difficulty, I give support an 8 out of 10, mostly due to the roaming aspect that I mentioned earlier, and also the very different playstyle to other roles. You're really not looking to kill people in support most of the time, and it can be hard to get into that mindset when you're coming from other roles. And finally, let's cover jungling, by far the hardest and most complex role to get into, but arguably the most rewarding due to its massive influence on the game. Jungling is, by nature, the most unique of all the roles due to having no lane or minions to cover, but instead gaining your XP and gold from various jungle camps around the map. Instead of looking to kill your opponent in lane, you're looking to spread your attention and gank lanes where you're needed to help your laning teammates get ahead and ultimately win teamfights later on. That's the end goal of every single role in Conquest. If you can't win in teamfights and secure the objectives, you're probably not going to win the game as a whole. I'll say this before I go any further though. If you're completely new to Smite or to Conquest, do not try to jump in straight with jungle. You'll have a bad time and will make your teammates have a bad time too. I highly recommend jumping in with a laning role first to learn the ins and outs of Conquest, and instead of trying to jump straight into jungle, just pay attention to what your jungler is doing in your games while you're learning another role so you have a basic idea before you start trying to jungle yourself. I see many people fail at the first hurdle with jungle, and most of the time it's because they try and jump straight in like they're Philip DeFranco instead of learning the game first. But if you're truly intent on maining jungle, the main gods you're going to see here are assassins. Due to the nature of junglers being required to roam and gank lanes, assassins do the best because of their high mobility to get around the map quickly. But other picks can also work in jungle. You're not limited to just assassins. Some warriors, mages, and even guardians can work. Hunters are really the only class you're never going to see in jungle typically. If you're up for a challenge and want a change from the traditional laning role, I highly suggest giving jungle a chance. It can be one of the most fun and rewarding ways to play Smite for sure. And if it wasn't clear before, jungle is a 10 out of 10 on the difficulty scale, by far the hardest role you can learn in Smite. So that's it. Hopefully this video was useful for you in terms of deciding what you want to main in Conquest, or just to teach you a little bit more about the other roles than your current main. If you did enjoy, then don't forget to drop a like before you leave, it really helps the channel out, and I'll catch you guys in another video later on. Peace out, you nerds.